interviewing the leading private equity executives and unlocking the secrets of success. Welcome to the Private Equity Podcast with Alex Rawlings.
Hello and welcome back to the Private Equity Podcast. Our podcast continues to grow and we doubled the amount of listeners from last month, and we have some really great interviews coming up, included in this one. So please do make sure that you are subscribed so it lands straight in your inbox. So really excited for this one. Joining us today is Dan Shockley, Managing Director and Co-founder at LFM Capital. Welcome and thank you very much for sharing your insight into the private equity industry, Dan.
Thank you, Alex. It's exciting to be here.
So I'm excited about every guest, but specifically with Dan because he works in the industrial space, and that's an area that I've operated in for the last 12, 13, whatever it is, years that I've worked in search. So excited to get your insight here, Dan. But for those of us that don't know you, please kick off by giving us the usual 60 to 90 second breakdown of yourself, please.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I'm one of the managing directors here at LFM Capital, a Nashville-based private equity firm that invests in the lower middle market and manufacturing space. You know, one of the things that's pretty different about LFM is that two of our founders have backgrounds like myself. We come from operating backgrounds. And so I studied metallurgical engineering undergrad. I went to work for Caterpillar doing welding and robotics research and development. Pretty quickly fell in love with manufacturing, and so took a move to a plant in Corinth, Mississippi in the remanufacturing business within Caterpillar. Was there several years, kind of learned manufacturing end to end, and then left Caterpillar to go to graduate school, studied mechanical engineering and business at MIT in a program called Leaders for Global Operations. It used to be Leaders for Manufacturing, or LFM, which is kind of our namesake. From there, during that program, I had a chance to do an internship with American Axle, a tier one automotive supplier, starting up a factory in China, and spent time both in Detroit at a union facility as well as in China starting up a facility, and then leveraged that background. When I returned to Caterpillar after graduate school, they asked me to go to China to lead a startup facility there just outside of Shanghai. So spent a little bit under 2 years there in a startup environment. Really proud of that season of my career. We built a pretty special facility. When I left, Cat was ranking the facilities kind of on their implementation of the Caterpillar production system globally. And that facility was ranked number one out of 140 facilities around the world. And so really proud of that time. From there, I was asked to move to Europe and be involved in the turnaround of a business that had been built through acquisition. And so several companies had been acquired by Cat, similar to the targets that we look at today. And they were kind of in various states of integration, and there were some struggling businesses. And so partnered with a peer of mine as a director of operations, and then later became general manager for that business. 2 facilities in the UK, one in France, one in Poland. Spent about 2.5 years living in Shrewsbury, UK, which was a great season of our life, and we enjoyed it a lot. But at that point, we had a 3-year-old son, 5 years overseas. It was time to get closer to grandparents. Started the move home with Caterpillar, and during that period was recruited, actually approached by a headhunter search firm, and recruited away to lead Ditch Witch's business in Perry, Oklahoma. So about 1,100 employees in my organization, kind of full end-to-end responsibility, about 425 million in revenue, and just a great time to learn, again, about a piece of the business that we recruit in today, just family-owned, founder-led businesses, which is a lot of the businesses that we look at. And then after a couple years there, for a number of reasons, decided it was time to move on. And after a brief period at Amazon, wound up joining LFM, got invited to join LFM as a co-founder. So we have been in business since April of 2014. I joined physically in June of that year. We raised our first fund by October, began investing the following year in 2015, and now we're investing out of Fund 2 in the manufacturing space. So hopefully that's a good overview.
That's a great overview. Thank you very much. So I'm going to guess that anybody listening here is going to have heard some company names there. Caterpillar, Ditch Witch, and Amazon have gone through your LinkedIn on it. Now, to my knowledge, none of them are private equity backed. And if they are, Amazon, that's certainly a big private equity backer, but and certainly with Caterpillar as well. So how did the transition to non-private equity backed business to finding and being involved in the setup of a private equity firm? Because you're going to, peak a few ears here, because I'm sure there's quite a few that are thinking, God, I'm in private equity portfolio company and I can't get into a private equity firm. So Dan, what's the magic?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a mentor very early in my career at Caterpillar that had spent his whole world in private equity. Today, he would be called an independent sponsor. He had done 26 deals in his career, and I loved the sort of world that he lived in, the stories that he would tell. And he had the unique experience of being involved through the entire life cycle of the deal, on the front end and the transaction, through kind of the hold period and the value add partnership with the management team, and then on exit. And I really wanted to both have that experience, but be prepared for it. And so when I was coming out of graduate school, I made a very deliberate decision to go take operating roles and not take a role as an analyst or an associate in a private equity firm, because I wanted to develop my operating skill set. And I knew that that was something that took reps and hands-on experience. And so I chose Caterpillar because structurally Caterpillar has a lot of smaller facilities. And I knew that I could get into a plant manager role relatively quickly. It was about 4 months after graduate school that I was in my first plant manager role. And so it gave me the opportunity to develop cross-functional leadership experience and expertise and really refine my skill set as an operator. I knew that was a risky bet, that path may never lead back to private equity. I was willing for that to be something that maybe gets delayed until, my corporate retirement or something along those lines. And our founding partner, executive managing director, Steve Cook, wound up at another private equity firm here in Nashville about 5 or 6 years before we started LFM. And I began to work with Steve as a consultant when they were looking at deals that overlapped with my background. We had known each other from our MIT days. He was recruiting on campus when I was a student, and we had kept in touch because we were both on the operating committee and at times the governing board at MIT for the LFM or LGO program. And so we had kept in touch. We developed that relationship. I got to know kind of investing style and operating style while we looked at deals together. I think we looked at 3 or 4. And fortunately, the plan had been that I would join those companies on the executive team. And so fortunately, the deals that we had worked on together didn't get across the finish line. And so I was available to be grabbed and pulled into LFM when Steve started LFM, which is a very fortunate chain of events. Feel really blessed to be here and to be part of LFM for sure.
Well, I think it's working on your own network and keeping and retaining those connections, and obviously you're retaining those relationships. I think you've been in a fortunate scenario where you've met this individual, but also you've retained that, you've added value to that individual, and you've had a good mutual relationship. So it's definitely a lesson for anybody out there is to network, build those relationships and put the effort in, and eventually it will pay off. So having seen both sides of things, obviously I'm sure that you're very active, and I'm sure they can't keep you out of their portfolio. Dan, I'm getting that sense from you. What one mistake you either see private equity firms making or their portfolio companies making?
Yeah, I mean, it probably isn't correct for me to say that I see this personally, because our direct experience with other private equity firms is pretty limited.
Okay.
But we certainly hear stories a lot about the way that other private equity firms engage with management teams. And I think it's something that we've been very, very thoughtful about. I think we're pretty We try to be very management friendly. We recognize that our management teams live in the company and in their industry every day. And they're closer to the customers. They understand the needs of the business better. They're closer to their teams and their employees. And so ultimately, that's kind of has to carry the day as it relates to making decisions for the business. And so we ask hard questions. We challenge the management teams. We partner with them to develop long-term strategy and, provide insights maybe from the research that we've done or some of the analytics that we've done. But at the end of the day, we have to have the right teams in place that we can trust them to make the day-to-day business, sort of day-to-day business decisions to drive the business forward. If we're second guessing them, that's a red flag in terms of the partnership that we want to have with our management teams. And so this thing that we see other private equity firms do, or the thing that we hear most frequently other private equity firms do, is they come into their partnership with the management team with a punch list of 100 items that they've decided need to be done in the business. And they present them not as suggestions or things for consideration or things to be worked into the other priorities the management team may have, but they come in with a punch list of kind of thou shalt do these things in the first, X, days, whatever. And I think that can be a very tough way to start a relationship with a management team. Management teams we have found are most successful when you have the right team in place and they're empowered to run the business and they're held accountable. They're supported when they need help. But at the end of the day, they feel trusted and they feel like you've got their back. And I think when you come in with a punch list of things that are pre-decided, it's really hard to recover from that and have the right type of partnership in place down the road.
Yeah, I agree implicitly. I think there's two elements to a relationship with your portfolio exec team. One is empowering them and to be able to make decisions. And two is knowing when you've got the wrong person or the wrong people in that business. And I think it's a very difficult one because I don't know a single person in private equity that's ever been trained on hiring and bringing on the right executives. We all have to do it through our life lessons. And we're trying to build something around trying to help based on our experiences and the thousands and thousands of people that we speak to in this industry and how we depict who's good and bad. But I think private equity investment professionals need to make calls on people that they're good or they're not. And if they're good and you've got them, then let them do what they know they're doing. Because appreciate, Dan, you've been in that world and you've been there. But you telling a chief exec and running a business for them, don't pay them, depending on the size of the business, $300,000, $400,000 a year plus bonus plus all the rest of it, and then tell them what to do because you don't need that. You want somebody to come in and be you to kind of questioning and coaching and discussing options rather than look, we need you to do X, Y, and Z, and them going against the grain, and that gets nobody nowhere.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm really thankful for in my operating experience was obviously when you're running organizations from 100 to 1,000 people, you get a lot of reps at training, developing, coaching, hiring people. And so, in the private equity world, if you've spent your whole career in the private equity world, you've had pretty few opportunities to really do that. Some within your firm, some within your portfolio, but it's just a different level when you're in an operating environment. You've got 1,000 people, you're working through annual feedback and reviews and developing development plans and doing all those kinds of things. Just have a lot more context for the kinds of decisions that we're making. And it helps me have a lot of confidence in the decisions when they need to be made.
Yeah, we learn through experience, and we can read, and I'm a big advocate of reading and studying and getting into that. But there's a management book out there that I've read that really gives you the nuances of what someone's going through, and you see an individual do something and you can understand the reasons why, because previously 3 times beforehand you've seen it happen. The first time you got it wrong and you called it. The second time you got it wrong and you called it. The third time you got it right and you don't know why, and then you begin to learn. So I completely agree with all of that. So you mentioned that you kind of had your eyes on private equity from quite early on. You're at MIT, and then suddenly the private equity world was already looking at you. So why the affiliation to this industry, and why the attraction?
Even though I'm an operator, I really love the transactional side of what we do. I think I was like 4 years old when my uncle nicknamed me "Make a Deal Dan," which is kind of silly, but I just love to negotiate. I love to kind of find that middle ground, the win-win. When I was in sales and business development at Caterpillar, I actually worked with some customers in the UK that had been very difficult customers for Caterpillar historically. And it really was fun to dig in and figure out what's motivating them. Where can we find some common ground? And I think we really moved that relationship forward for both parties. And that's really fun and energizing to me. And it's a lot like what we do. A lot of the businesses that we partner with are founder owned. And they're solving for a set of things. Obviously the financial side is one, but they're looking for the right kind of partner. A lot of times they see the business as their legacy, and they're looking for a great home for that legacy. And I think that's something that we try very hard to honor in our process and the way that we partner with companies. And so you're trying to really solve this multifactorial equation to find overlap between what we're trying to achieve and what they're trying to achieve. And I just find that incredibly engaging and a whole lot of fun. I also love, the operating side of things. Part of what kind of makes me tick is being able to have an impact on people, to be able to provide great jobs, to be able to see people grow and develop and advance in their career. And so the operating side of what we do allows us to have an impact on a lot of families, across the US and a lot of different cities and a lot of different areas. And I find that really engaging. And so I don't know, private equity, it's also a place to kind of bet on your team and bet on yourself, which is something that in the corporate environment, you just simply don't get to do. And so I'm a very competitive person. I'm very metrics oriented. That sort of fits with me very, very well. And so it's just an area where a lot of the things that kind of motivate me and make up who I am intersect. And so, as I mentioned, that mentor early in my career kind of opened the world to me. But prior to that, it was something that I didn't really know private equity existed as a place to land. They weren't recruiting heavily at the University of Missouri-Rolla when I graduated undergrad. And so I had no idea that the world existed. But once my eyes were opened, I went to graduate school, learned as much as I possibly could about the space, took a ton of finance classes, invested in those skills. But, as I mentioned, ultimately decided the operating skill set was something that I really needed reps to refine first. And so decided to go about it in that order. And I'm thankful I did. It worked for me. And it's allowed me to, I think, be a pretty good partner with our portfolio companies.
Very good. Very good. It's it's anyone who's listened to any of the podcasts will have heard me drone on about, this industry and what it creates. And I completely mirror what you've just said there. It creates a lot of opportunity. Every industry has its good and bad. And I think private equity well outweighs itself with anything negative. Any business that doesn't work out happens everywhere and anything. But the growth that's driven just impacts everything, impacts families, impacts local economies, impacts even global economies. So I think it's definitely a top industry, and the people that come into this are the best, which again, I stress, if you're having problems with the portfolio, then you need to make those changes, because this industry attracts the very best in the industry. And therefore we have some phenomenal operators at the portfolio level and at a private equity firm level. Some really impressive people. So you mentioned that all the bits that you love about private equity in there, Dan. So, you've been in it a while and admired it from afar, I suppose, and also been closer to it at the same time with your advising and everything else. What do you hate or what do you dislike about the private equity industry?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think that I think the private equity industry largely, can be very kind of data and analytics driven. And I think that it's a place that you have to be very careful, because the data tells part of the story, but you really have to work to understand the context. And so, a few years ago, we had a company that was kind of going through a tough period. And so you're trying to figure out, well, is this management team performance? Is it company performance? Is it just a soft spot in the industry? And does it come back? And I think that, the data told a pretty tough story. The performance was really suffering, and there weren't a lot of bright spots in the data at that time, but we were able to kind of leverage our operating experience, go in, come alongside the management team, kind of put your ear to the rail, as you might say, and really develop a better understanding of both the objective data and facts, but also the subjective, what's going on with customers, what's going on with customer relationships, what's happening within the team. And we rode that through with the management team. And that company is, doing extremely well. One of the bright spots in our portfolio 18 months later. And so, I think that there's a lot of danger in private equity of being very return focused. And I think, we kind of live by the rule, fail fast. If you make a mistake, whether it be with strategy or a hiring, to make a decision quickly, get back on track and move forward. But sometimes if you're too reliant on the data to understand to define failure, right, then you might make a quick reaction to something that wasn't really a problem. And so I think that that's a really tough part of private equity, is that, in a corporate environment, you have time, you can be patient, you can weather those issues a little bit longer and not, have any significant consequences. In private equity, that takes a lot more fortitude to weather a tough season and not take sort of drastic action. And so, I think the industry as a whole just needs to develop a better balance between the subjective and objective data that they have at their fingertips, and know when to react. And when they do need to react, do it quickly and decisively. But sometimes riding it out is the right option. And I think that's just an important distinction that's particularly time sensitive in our industry.
So if we look at you've worked on both sides of the table. What advice would you give to private equity professionals to better connect and engage with their portfolio companies? We talked a little bit about that kind of empowerment and, giving them a little bit of a, freedom within a framework type. Here's our goal, you take us there. If you can build on that and any additions. And also, what advice would you give to portfolio executives based on what you've seen to be able to increase their performance and perform at a higher level?
That's a lot in a couple questions. I'll start with the first piece of that. I think we talk a lot about having a pull relationship with our portfolio companies. It's a term that we borrow from Lean. And basically what it means is, we define success as when our management teams are reaching out to us and asking for help, instead of us, kind of coming in and saying, hey, we want to work on, this or that with them. We think they're a better filter for the priorities of the business. We want them to know who we are, where we've been, and what we've done. And if we can be helpful, pick up the phone and call us. And so, I've leveraged my metallurgy background on product development projects. I've leveraged my experience implementing ERP systems to help a team through an ERP system. We've worked on HR practices and policies and all kinds of things. And I kind of measure the health of a relationship with an executive, kind of by looking at how often am I calling them versus how often are they calling me. And I want them to be calling me a lot more often than I'm calling them. We kind of have the required fun and a relationship, which is, monthly financial updates and quarterly board meetings and those sorts of things. But outside of that, I want them to use this as a sounding board. I want them to call and talk about, financing or maybe customer strategy or product strategy or, any number of things. And so I believe that a good measure of a healthy relationship between the private equity firm and the portfolio company is that the scope of that relationship is largely defined by the portfolio company in a very positive light. And I think that's what success looks like to me. I think in terms of the performance side, I think advice that I would have for a portfolio company executive is that they should look at the private equity firm as a resource, particularly around setting strategy, research, analytics, understanding the industry, understanding the opportunities. One of the things that's most important that we do in strategy is we decide what not to do, what not to focus on. And I think that the private equity firms can really help, strengthen the analysis that goes in to the decision-making around strategy in a way that can add a lot of value to the portfolio company team. Look, in our industry, most of the time, the portfolio company executive team is very aligned and motivated financially with the private equity firm. Our interests rise and fall together. And so they should be very motivated to take help where they can get it. And I think that, getting aligned on strategy, making sure they know where they're going to focus their time, energy, capital, investment, acquisition, targeting process, all of those things, just an area that the private equity firm can add a lot of value. It doesn't mean that they get the last vote or that they, necessarily know more, but we have found that when we take the insights and the industry knowledge and the customer experience that our executive teams have, and we combine it with the analytics that we have, we can really come to a strategy that can drive a lot of, growth and value creation within the portfolio company. And that's what we're really striving to do.
So what do you see as the major trends that manufacturing and industrial companies are facing at the moment?
Sure. I think it's interesting kind of in a post-COVID world, the impact that we're seeing in companies related to COVID over the last year or so and still continuing. Obviously in 2020, a lot of companies were negatively impacted either by demand or by operational impacts of the disease. But now we're seeing demand just really explode for a lot of companies. And so for us, one of the things that we're looking at really hard in diligence, whether it be building material, building products companies, or, things like outdoor recreation and, medical supplies, and just there's a lot of areas that have been impacted. And we're working hard to figure out, what of that impact is long-term and sustainable, what of that is short-term. And I think you see an impact of that throughout the industrial landscape. Supply chains are tight, ports are overrun, lead times are growing and long. As people worry about whether they can get what they need when they need it, they're placing more and more demand on their suppliers further and further out. And so there's just a lot of capacity constrained businesses across the industry, in all facets of the industry. And I think that's something that's really defining the challenges of industry right now. You combine that with, worker shortages. So we've been talking about for decades, an increasing shortage of tradesmen, skilled tradesmen in particular, and women. And, now a lot of employees, a lot of workers have been taken out of the workforce because, they have acute medical conditions or they're concerned about exposure, or they're otherwise, choosing to stay out of the workforce temporarily. And so we're seeing just extreme worker shortages throughout industry. And so one of the interesting things that's driving is a new and fresh interest in automation. We have some businesses that have exposure to automation. We have a number of businesses that are looking at investing in automation. But automation, when I was early in my career, a lot of the time that I spent at Caterpillar was writing, ROIs and, ROI analyses for investments in automation. And at that time, it was, you're replacing a worker at $12 or $15 an hour. Can you pay it back fast enough? Today, it's shifting. It's shifting away from labor cost savings to, if I don't have a person because I can't hire them, the robot or the investment in automation means I can either ship the product or I can't. And that's just a very different ROI. And so we're seeing a lot of investment across the industry in automation. I think you're going to see a permanent uptick in sort of the adoption of automation. Historically, there have only been a few industries that were really at maturity as it relates to automation, industries like auto that have been investing in it for decades and decades. But a lot of other industries struggled to write those business cases because it's just it was borderline. But now with labor shortages the way that they are, a new understanding of what can happen in a world with a pandemic or other kind of workforce disruption like we've experienced over the last 12 months, we're seeing a lot of people with a renewed interest in automation. I think it's a really exciting time for industries that are, for companies that are exposed to automation and serving, customers that are working to implement automation. So that's just an area that I think kind of will never be the same after 2020, 2021.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's accelerated the whole adoption of technology, especially into what I regard as older industries. Manufacturing isn't seen as the most modern and focused industry in the world, but it depends on how you look at it. Technically, Tesla is a manufacturing company. They manufacture a lot of things. They go through a lot of stuff. But, Tesla is seen at the forefront of technology due to its battery technology, its AI technology, its autonomous drive. But, that blend is definitely happening where the industry is beginning to adopt technology and bringing it in to drive it. And automation is a key demonstration of that. So my favorite subject, back onto talent, Dan, what are your beliefs of the three attributes that make a top performer?
Yeah, I think that it's hard to limit it to three, to be kind of honest, but I'll do my best. I think the first one is just having the humility to listen. It kind of goes back to the conversation about what some private equity firms do wrong, coming in with a punch list of things they've already decided need to be done. There might be a lot of good ideas on that list, but I think you have to have the humility to understand that you don't know everything and that your management teams know a lot about their business. And by taking the time to listen to them, I just think that you get to a better answer. And I think that you get the team on board with the things that do rise to the top and kind of make the cut, if you will. And so I think that's a really key dimension of any leader, is just being humble enough to really listen to their team, to their partners, to us as the private equity firm. We get there when we work as a team. We come from a diversity of backgrounds and experiences, and if we combine all of that, we do it, as a team, I think we get to a far better answer. A second dimension that I think is really important is, just kind of having security with, who you are as a leader, knowing very clearly with confidence your strengths, but also having a high degree of awareness of your weaknesses and being okay with them. I think when we partner with executives, if we can have really transparent conversations, and I'll always share my weaknesses up front, and the things that they need to know about working with me. And it really helps kind of clear the air and make sure that we're getting off on the right foot. And if they can do the same, I think that just really creates a foundation of trust for the partnership. And so security is really important. And then in our industry, the ability to hold people accountable within your team, but also be comfortable being held accountable, is really important. It kind of is what defines private equity is just a focus on performance. And at the heart of that performance is setting goals and holding each other accountable to those goals. And some days that might mean raising your hand and asking for help, and that's perfectly okay. We love getting those phone calls and love being part of that solution when a commitment starts to become more difficult than it was envisioned to be. But man, just being comfortable in that environment is really important in our space.
I agree with all those three. I think that ability to ask and that self-awareness piece of, look, I'm good at this, I'm good at that. Too many chief execs that we will interview and they'll be like, I know everything, I know better. I don't need a CFO, I don't need this. And I'm like, there's no way you know it all. I don't know a CEO I don't know anyone who's fully rounded and can do it all at the top of a business. You need good people around you to be able to accelerate growth and take a business in the right direction. So I completely agree with all those points. So Dan, what are your influences? What do you read, or where do you read? Where do you watch? What do you listen to?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. It's something that I've really reevaluated over the last year or two. I've kind of withdrawn from the news and social media and all of that stuff. It just got to be, too much kind of bickering and fighting. My influences really are the people around me, the people within LFM, the teams within our portfolio. That's where I spend my time. Those are the people that I listen to the most and kind of let shape my worldview the most. We've had a very busy season. I think you can appreciate that 2020 for most leaders in industry was one of the toughest years of many of our careers. Just, you're planning for a recession. You're planning to, how do we keep our teams safe, meet our customer needs? Some of our industries were critical, to responding to the pandemic. One of our businesses last year made ambulances. And so we need to get ambulances out into the market to serve the needs that are there. But at the same time, we have a duty to keep our employees safe and make sure that they're healthy and taken care of. And how do you, kind of do what's best for both? And that led to long days, long nights, lots of worry about the responsibilities that we carry. And so I haven't been reading as much, as many books and things as I have in past seasons, but so pretty live people interaction kind of influences these days. I have a close group of friends that I spend a lot of time with, and that's kind of, like I said, what I'm using to shape my worldview these days.
Good. I think that's a good message to get off. I certainly stopped the news. When it first came out, I really felt this responsibility, leading the business to be knowing what's going on and kind of being sharing some of that information. And then, quickly it was, I've got no idea what's going on. I'm focused on doing what I'm doing, and I don't need to hear the negativity and, everything. Don't get me wrong, everything that happens is awful. But there's only so often you can read that and stay in the right frame of mind. So I agree with that implicitly. So Dan, if there's anybody listening that wants to, continue a bit of a discussion with you, reach out for whatever reason, maybe talk a bit of manufacturing shop type world, how best do they reach out to you?
Yeah, go to the team page of the LFM website. My email address is there, direct to me. My phone number is there, direct to me. Would love to pick up the conversation, talk about LFM, talk about being an executive in PE, pick up other topics as well. So happy to interact with folks that listen to the podcast and heard our discussion today.
Perfect. Well, Dan, I've really enjoyed it. I love the industrial world, and I certainly love to discuss it, especially to see your trajectory into private equity, and who would have known with the direction that you took that the ambition was always to be in private equity, even working for the big boys like Caterpillar and even Amazon. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I really appreciate you giving us your insight.
You bet, Alex. It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And as always, thank you very much for all our listeners out there. Should you ever need support with private equity professionals, or of course, C-suite portfolio executive hiring, please do reach out to me here at Raw Selection. I'll be delighted to help. Please do subscribe and you'll be notified of the next podcast. But till the next time, keep smashing it. And thank you very much for everybody for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Private Equity Podcast on www.raw-selection.com.